Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we are joined by our panelists, Evan Green and Alexandra Cole, who will provide us with the latest developments in Canadian immigration. Please feel free to ask any questions via the questions icon at the top of your screen, and we will do our best to address them at the end. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can connect them through the information provided on screen. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to Evan and Alexandra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. So we have a pretty full agenda of just policy updates and things that have changed recently that we're going to go through. Perhaps the biggest one for a lot of people is the bill that's currently going through Parliament, which is proposing new legislation for Canadian citizenship by descent.
Perhaps we should give a little bit of a background as to the bill. So what happened was that there was a court case that was determined in the fall that a group had gotten together and they were challenging the current legislation, which only allowed for first-generation born abroad to obtain Canadian citizenship. So the example I'll give is my kid lives in New York City, born in Canada. My grandchildren would be eligible for first generation born abroad because my son was born in Canada, okay? But my great grandchildren under the current legislation would not be. It was second.
The result of which was they changed this legislation. So now it was being challenged all these years later, and they won. And in the court case, they said, yes, the government had 6 months in which to change the legislation, and they've come forward with the legislation now to continue on with Canadian citizenship for second generation born abroad. But there's a change in that legislation. There must be a direct connection to Canada. And what is the direct connection, Alex?
So what's being proposed is that you have to have a substantial connection to Canada, which is your Canadian parent who was born abroad, who's now passing that citizenship to you in the second generation, has to have a cumulative 1,095 days of physical presence, so being inside Canada before the birth of the child or the adoption of the child that they're passing citizenship to. So that is what is being proposed as a substantial connection.
I think that they're trying to make it simple, but I don't think it's going to be so simple. I think there'll be a lot of messy situations where how do you prove a 2-year-old to 5-year-old was in Canada? And I think, it's one thing if you've got high school records or, once the child is in school, but previous to that, I think that's going to be problematic. Mm-hmm. And I think that counting days is going to be problematic and dealing with all of that. I think that there's a lot of things here, a lot of gray, and stand by. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we'll probably see a lot of the government just relying on people declaring dates and then maybe their own due diligence on the back end with whatever records they can access. Because how do you prove a child was here?
Right. Right. I guess you have to prove the parents were here.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Lots of things to discuss, but this is the new legislation that came out. It hasn't been passed yet, but it should be passed fairly quickly.
We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see.
Next, we just wanted to provide an update on parental sponsorships, parental and grandparents, actually. So starting May 21st, the immigration started sending out invitations to individuals who had expressed an interest in sponsoring their parents or grandparents for permanent residence. And those will be going out for the next 2 weeks from May 21st forward. The 2024 intake is set at 35,700 people. And what's interesting about it is they are still pulling from the pool of expressions of interest that was inputted in 2020. So there has not been an opportunity for new people to put forward their expression of interest to sponsor their parents since that year. That's just how many people were in the pool.
Yeah, I mean, I look at these as very much like the US and what's going on in the US, because the US has had backlogs for years in these categories, and that's what we basically got. Although the big difference is nobody after 2020 has been allowed to submit an application, so you can't even get in line because the old line is so long, the government thinks. So we'll have to see how this plays going forward.
I think it raises some interesting concerns or issues. So, you know, in order to sponsor your parents or grandparents, you do need to show a minimum necessary income going back a few fiscal years. And if you put in your expression in 2020, you know, saying for 2019, 2018, I had enough income, your circumstances could have changed significantly since that time. I mean, we're in 2024 now, so you're going back, you know, 3 years from now. So over the years, we've had a few situations where we've had sponsors who got these invitations and they said, oh, you know what? I don't need it anymore, or I opened my own company, or, you know, I went on maternity leave.
Moved to the United States for 2 years.
Lots of changes. So, you know, you can always kind of look at that and say, well, if it's like a minor difference or you're on track to meet the minimum income for the 2024 year, you can potentially ask immigration for some discretion, some humanitarian consideration there. That's where you might want to consult with legal counsel, get an opinion, get some help with that. But there are ways to maybe address it so that you're you know, not left without an option after waiting 4 years and finally getting this invitation.
Right. Interesting. I often will be consulted with the situation of, oh, my parents are here now. I want to sponsor my parents, or my dad passed away. Now my mom's here. I want to sponsor my mom. Can I do it in a humanitarian application? What do you say?
No, I mean, in most cases, my answer is no.
I agree.
Because there is the pathway, albeit it's very limited because of the intake caps. In most scenarios, that sort of application isn't going to be successful. If you have a truly exceptional circumstance outside of the typical, obviously terrible situation of one parent passing away, then you might be able to do that.
Right.
But otherwise,
very hard to prove. And then obviously the super visa is in place for that. So yes, you know, mom can be here, but she can't get benefits and she can't get health care, and you've got to pay for all of that. That's what the super visa is for.
Right.
So the general answer is I agree with you. No.
And I guess, you know, sponsorships are taking quite a few years to process. So even if you're pending a parental sponsorship, you can still consider applying for a super visa in the interim, so that your parents can come visit and stay for extended periods.
Right. And remember, though, it can't be approved within the country. They can't be in the country when you file the application.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Next on the agenda.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the IRCC portals and processing times. There is expected to be an update on IRCC's overall usage of portals in the coming year or so. They are working towards having a centralized portal that is, I think, much more user-friendly and kind of has better aspects for, you know, using a representative, doing it on your own. So we're looking forward to that, because as anyone who's used the portals will know, there's GC Key, there's the old MyCIC, there's the PR portal, there's a citizenship portal, there's, you know, 2 different TRV portals. So that is expected to be centralized.
And they go down.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, our biggest frustration is when the portal's not working.
Yeah,
right?
It can be difficult. So things are being done to kind of make that simpler. In the meantime, I just wanted to talk about the kind of two ways in which you can apply for a TRV. So some of you may know that IRCC has their IRCC Secure Account portal, which is kind of the original one, which you can use to apply for work permits, study permits, visitor visas, things like that. And then they created a few years ago this new IRCC portal, which was created more exclusively for certain types of study permits and mostly TRVs for visits, which is supposed to have this kind of 15 to 30 business day processing time. So often when we're looking at filing a TRV, we'll actually consider which portal is going to suit our needs better. And a lot of it comes down to processing times. Processing times are always a problem. We have countries around the world where the consular processing times are as long as 250, 300 days.
I looked at South Africa this week. It was
Yeah.
230 days for
Yeah.
the TRV.
So that's a scenario where we often do look at the newer portal, which has this 15 to 30 day processing time, give or take, and we'll use that one. So it's just something to keep in mind for anyone applying for TRVs, that you can use those strategically.
Great, great. So what other things have happened in the last little bit that we should be talking about?
I mean, so obviously there's a lot going on in the world, and the government is responding with special measures. So we've seen a lot of different special measures coming out for Israeli nationals, Palestinians. We've had programs for Iranian nationals, Ukrainians. So just a few updates we wanted to go through. The special measures for Israeli nationals and Palestinian passport holders who are in Canada is expiring on June 12th. The primary kind of part of that program that we have been using is to obtain study permits and open work permits for these individuals so that they can remain in Canada and be able to study or work. So if anyone is eligible, that needs to be filed before June 12th.
That's right. That's right. That we don't know whether that's going to be extended or not.
Yeah.
As of right now, the indication is it's not getting extended.
Right. We did see the similar program for Iranian nationals was extended by a year into 2025. So we might see that happen.
Right, right. And there was an announcement about people in Gaza being eligible if they're family members in Canada for up to 5,000, but obviously those have their own nuances, and don't have enough time on the call to perhaps go through all of those.
Right.
But,
I think the biggest takeaway for that is the government is trying to make it easier for, I think, their processing officers to approve certain types of applications. So they've removed some of the typical requirements for individuals who are submitting visa applications while they're physically in Gaza who have family in Canada. One of the major ones is they don't need to show sufficient financial resources, and they don't need to satisfy the government, like Canada, that they will depart Canada at the end of their stay. Because typically anyone applying for a temporary visa needs to demonstrate in their application that they have continued ties to their home country and they're a genuine bona fide visitor. So they've removed kind of those assessment requirements from these applications.
so Ukrainian nationals.
Yeah, so the Ukrainian program did end on March 31st. It was not extended beyond that date, but what IRCC has said is if you applied for a work permit under the special measures for Ukrainian nationals before it closed, and for whatever reason it wasn't approved in time for you to come to Canada by March 31st, you now have until July 31st to come. So they've kind of just extended the ability of individuals to travel and get their work permit as long as they have already applied.
Right, right. And sort of the last thing we want to talk about is a very interesting issue for us, which is flagpoling. So flagpoling, what that term has come to mean is somebody who holds some status in Canada would go to the border, turn around and come back in because they have to make the application at the port of entry. And with processing times for extensions at what, 120 days?
Yeah, approximately.
Approximately 120 days. You may have a circumstance where somebody's healthcare may expire or other issues where it makes a lot of sense to get this done because they do have the jurisdiction at the port of entry to adjudicate these applications. However, they do not like doing these applications. So what's happening?
We're getting a lot more pushback from border officers, particularly at land borders. A lot of them will say, oh, if you still have a valid work permit, you can come in, but apply from in Canada.
Exactly.
So it's not really worth it a lot of the time, especially if you're taking a special trip outside of Canada just to do this. We're seeing a lot of people who will go to the border at, the very first part of the morning, and they're being told, we've already filled our quota for the
Right.
day. We're seeing people camping out overnight by the borders. So it's just, something to keep in mind is always apply for your extension well in advance, longer than the 4-month processing time, so that you're not put in that position where you feel that you need to do that.
So how long in advance should you apply for your extension?
I would say 6 months.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
6 months is the correct answer for that.
Yeah.
We used to say 4, but no, 6.
Mhm.
6. So those that are doing flag pulling and have done it in the past, our advice is don't do it in the future. Don't rely on it in the future. And even if you go, you may get very frustrated. They're expecting extraordinarily long waits. Even if they see you, they may say no, like you said.
Yeah, and there are certain borders that provide the service, land borders, and they have hours of operation. So if you're thinking of doing it, you need to check the Canada Border Services Agency website and make sure you're aware of their service hours, and which borders will actually entertain this.
Yeah.
Because some will not even entertain it. And
It's very easy for them to say no, and they say no.
Mhm.
Right?
Exactly.
They do. They do. So I think we've pretty much covered all the updates for the month.
Yeah, and if anyone has any, specific questions or situation, please do get in touch with us. We're happy to help. And we hope that some of this was useful for you.
Okay, and enjoy a beautiful day in May. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.